Recently, a New York Times Siena poll came out that sent Democrats freaking out because it seems like the president is flailing in the Midwestern states and the states that are going to decide the election, what we call it, the swing states. And, I looked at the polls and my thing was, it's not that the polls are wrong. That's just how they conducted the poll doesn't really reflect what the likely voter model is going to be, or, where people are. And, I said that to myself, and I continue to hold to the belief that by the time we get down to November, we are not going to have a close election. I repeat, we're not going to have a close election. It's going to be a Democratic landslide from the bottom all the way up to the top, if we do what we are supposed to do. Remember, the right side of the equation has no policy. And once it's pointed out to the American people that there is no policy there and that their personal economy, their health economy, and all these other economies are in danger, at that point, they will start really taking account to what needs to happen. And that means a landslide victory for the middle and left side of the aisle. Listen to these two pollsters, John De La Volpe and Larry Sabato, because these guys have been more right than wrong. Check it out, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Last week, a New York Times Siena College poll found that Trump was leading Biden in 5 out of 6 battleground states. And those numbers got a lot of attention. But I have 2 guests standing by who have some serious questions about that polling. Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia says he laughed when he read the result for Nevada. How could Trump be ahead by double digits in a state that has gone blue for 2 decades? And John De La Volpe, who runs polling at Harvard's Kennedy School, asked how Biden could be 24 points ahead in the Wisconsin youth vote, but 27 points behind in the Michigan youth vote. There are more questions where those came from. Larry, walk us through this, because when these polls come out, these polls carry the narrative for a good week and a half till the next polls come along, and not enough people are saying, hold on a minute. How are these polls actually conducted? So you say you laughed when you first saw this. Why?
Because the result's absurd. That's always a good test for polling. And I know John has looked at this too. So many of the internals are directly contradictory. You mentioned one. It's true with young people. It's true with elderly voters. It's true with minorities. 23% of blacks voting for Trump. Please get real. And here's the problem, Stephanie. It's not so much that there are polls being taken. There will always be polls taken because it's clickbait, and the news organizations make lots of money on this, or they at least claim they do. It gets lots of attention. And you're right. I'm not exaggerating, I personally saw 100 references to this poll in print and on TV pundit panels. And somehow the narrative changed overnight from this is a very close race, why it's just going to be a handful of votes in 6 or 7 states, to, boy, Biden's losing. He's doing terribly. What can he do to turn this around? No, nothing major changed. It's May. The election is in October and November. I just have to remember something. I'm old enough to remember it when Senator Gene McCarthy in 1963 very wisely said, the press is like a bunch of blackbirds on a telephone pole. When one moves, they all move. When one comes back, they all come back. Safety in numbers, but boy, is there a lot of groupthink in the press. I'd love it if they mixed it up more and disagreed, but apparently they can't argue with numbers published by the great New York Times.
Well, we're mixing it up right now, my friend. John, what makes you doubt this poll?
Well, many of the same things that Larry mentioned in terms of these internals. When something doesn't make sense, that gives me pause to take a step back and to compare these internal numbers time after time after time, consistently within the New York Times poll or across other polls. And not just did we see 51 point differences between Michigan and Wisconsin, but we saw similar 50-something point differences among younger people in Arizona, in Nevada. I spent a lot of time talking to younger people. I spent a lot of time talking to older voters, and I just don't see that variance from state to state to state. We have to remember, Stephanie, as Larry indicated, polling is much more than averaging a bunch of horse races. It's much more than informing betting markets. Doing our job well means informing our democracy. It means giving voice to the people. And my concern, when we have inconsistency state after state among younger folks, among Hispanic folks, among older folks, that's not doing our job in terms of public opinion researchers. And that's the message I think that's so important to recognize in this conversation.
John, you wrote last week, quote, "If I misrepresent an X-ray or an MRI, it doesn't mean the medical imaging is broken. It means I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not a doctor." Same with polling. What do you mean here?
What I mean is that there's a cottage industry on people on social media who are analytics experts, and they believe by averaging horse races, they can interpret public opinion. And they then say public opinion is broken. I'm not saying that public opinion or polling is broken. What I'm saying is I know how to fix it. And the way in which you fix it, if it is broken, the way in which you fix it is to develop samples that are representative of all of the subgroups that make up the electorate. Okay, so I'm not going to look at X-rays and say and have an opinion on X-rays and say if I miss one that all of imagery is broken. Okay, I'm not a physician. Just like most of the people on Twitter are not pollsters. To do polling well, it's just not about averaging numbers. It's about pulling the samples, listening to people, and making sure you have a consistent voice throughout the survey.
Well, polls are not the only way we hear from voters. Obviously, reporters interview them. There are focus groups. Do we focus too much on polls, Larry?
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with the way John has phrased his concerns about this, but I would add something far broader. John mentioned democracy. That's what worries me, and it ought to be worrying everybody. All this money and energy and space devoted to polls where the numbers are going to change many, many times between now and the actual election, instead of having, say, a front page article on what Trump said over the weekend about his third term. The Constitution doesn't permit that. In fact, he mentioned FDR, who had 4 terms. Or a few hours ago, Trump posted on social media a couple of articles that talked about the Third Reich, the unity of the Third Reich, or maybe it was the Fourth Reich, but it was the Reich. Hey, this is significant. You know, we're listening to it. Listen to him. He's telling us what he is and what he wants to do. That should be the front page article, not what some poll showed overnight in Nevada or Wisconsin, which may or may not be accurate or which may or may not hold up even for 3 days.
Now, folks, like I said, if you look at the polls, and I love what Villapolfe and the other guys said, they saw the poll and it was like, ha, 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 ha. Really now? Come on. And you know what? For anybody who says, remember the way when you attacked the right for having the skewed polls and talking about skewed polls, and it turns out the polls weren't skewed at all. The Democrats won in landslides. This is not the same situation at all. We're not talking about skewed polls. We're talking about real polls. Here's the thing. These are the same polls that made you believe the abortion bills or I think it was a constitutional amendment in Kansas, in Kentucky, in all these places were actually going to be a close fight. Somehow it's going to be close. And all these issues won in landslides. Because when folks went behind that curtain or in the privacy of their voting booth, what they said to themselves is, I have to live 4 years with this choice. Am I going to run the risk that my daughter, in case she comes out with an unexpected pregnancy, that she cannot protect her personal economy? If I turned out that I need that the only way for me to have a kid is to have IVF, in vitro fertilization, that I can't do it. If I let this 4 years go and find out that I probably won't be able to have contraception, if I find out that the free press is free no more, if I find out that if I speak against certain governmental agencies, that I can be sued or I can have the IRS sicked after me. When you start putting all these things into perspective, and the truth of the matter, for once, the left side of the aisle has the money to publicize that. But even if they didn't have the money, crowdsourcing is up and ready to go at the opportune time to put the message out. So for those who are hyperventilating about the polls, don't. But you got to get to work now, because you're not going to win by sitting down being scared in your couch. You're going to win by being an active participant. You're going to win by making sure those who have the fund to fund organizations pushing the message, like yours truly and others, you fund. You make sure that those organizations are able to do the job. Not paying big time consultants, but paying those who can get that message out, and get that message out often, accurately, truthfully, and morally. So folks, don't fret the polls. Make the polls.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.